Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for making AP Human Geography a part of your day. Today, we're going to be looking at the second part of Chapter 2, Population, which is essentially one of three lessons we're going to have on the population and migration unit. We'll do a full lesson on migration upcoming. And as we're looking at this, what we want to talk about today are mainly finishing up the demographic transition model, talking about Malthusian theory, getting into some problems presented by aging populations, and also discussing women and demographic change. The picture here is simply just a representation of you pursuing studying for your AP Human Geography exam and the success that will invariably come with that, without turning around to look at distractions or Netflix. Or, not to say you can't watch Netflix, but there's only so many hours of television we can watch a day before it's time to prioritize what's important. And your learning is what's important to me. Therefore, I'm prioritizing that during this season, obviously. So let's pick back up where we left off a little bit last time, and that was stage 4 of the demographic transition. We had stage 1 of the demographic transition where birth rate was high, death rate was high, right? Stage 2, where death rate takes the plunge. The difference between the birth and death rate is the natural increase rate. Stage 3, where for the first time, birth rate starts to go down, but death rate goes down with it. A natural increase rate that's shrinking, but still a natural increase rate. And stage 4, low birth, low death rate. Right? So low birth and low death rate will give you zero population growth. An NIR of 0 gives you zero population growth. A total fertility rate of 2.1 gives you zero population growth. I don't want to get into the biology of the whole thing, but essentially you're having two people replace two people. That would be zero population growth. The 0.1 comes for every girl that doesn't reach childbearing years. That's where the 0.1 comes in. North America and Europe are in stage 4 of the demographic transition. Japan is in stage 4 of the demographic transition. Australia is in stage 4 of the demographic transition. Now, we had talked a little bit about, like, what does that look like? Well, fewer women are having children for a variety of reasons. One, our society, children are expensive in a developed country. The other thing is you have more women in the labor force in a developed country on average. So you also have more access to contraception. And the last thing is emerging adulthood. That is to say, people are marrying later in their life. And not only are they marrying later, but then that delays. We talk about childbearing years. Your book defines that as 15 to 49. So Denmark is an example of a country with low birth and death rates. Now, here's the reason why I like to use this picture. When we talk about birth and death rate, they don't have to be ZPG. You could have a small natural increase rate and it stay that way for a long time, and we would evaluate that. A demographer would look at that and say, yeah, they're in stage 4 of the demographic transition. Note that in Denmark, on this representation, the birth rate has never gone below the death rate. But we still say they're in stage 4 of the demographic transition. Okay? Now, what about stage 5? Technically, it doesn't exist because to admit to stage 5 would be admitting to extinction, because you can't go back in the stages of the demographic transition. That is to say, if your death rate would exceed your birth rate, stage 5 would say, well, that's a permanent move. And we can't commit to saying that. But the basic idea of a stage 5 is a super low group birth rate, a death rate that's higher than the birth rate, a negative natural increase rate, losing people in a society, Therefore, the only way that you can have population increase or growth would be to have an immigration system. That's why you see guest worker and immigration programs all throughout Europe, because many of these Western European countries have negative natural increase rates. So if they want to see their economies grow and they want to generate taxable revenue from a shrinking working class, they need to bring workers in order to be able to do that if it fits with their goals. Several European countries have had negative natural increase rates for a long time. Russia is the largest example at over 50 years of a negative NIR. We still don't say they're in stage 5 of the demographic transition. When you look at a country that would be, if we conceded stage 5, Japan has been teetering around this area for a long time, and they also have a large aging population. That's a testament to a good healthcare system. But that large aging population, they're projecting out, here's 2050, what they're projecting out that they're going to continue to live long and healthy lives, but that puts a stress or a burden on the people in their working or productive years, what we would call the independents, and this would be a high elder dependency ratio. Contrast that with 1950. I'm looking at that. That's clearly a stage 2 of the demographic transition. Stage 2 is a high youth dependency ratio. So that's something that you would need to think about. A couple of you had questions on that last time as I was fielding some emails. Stage 2 is going to have a high youth dependency ratio. Stage 4 and a potential stage 5 are going to have a high elder dependency ratio. Both of them present challenges. So there are 2 successful strategies for lowering birth rates. The first one is going to be economic development. And what I mean by that is, as a state or a country begins to attain higher levels of economic development, more money can then be spent on improving education and improving healthcare. And you also see a correlation with economic development of women's achievement in not only education, but ultimately, as more women have an opportunity to be educated, they're represented in a country's workforce, not only in terms of volume, but also in terms of the positions that they hold. More women in positions of power, more women advancing on up the economic ladder. When we talk about improved healthcare system, this kind of is counterintuitive, but think about it like this. If you have a country with an infant mortality rate that's super high, right? You might have, okay, so for example, the infant mortality rate in sub-Saharan African countries is 80. That means 80 per 1,000. That means 8% of children in many sub-Saharan African countries on average don't see their first birthday. Well, you might have 5 kids to hope that 4 survive. And I know that's really bleak to talk about, but that's a real decision that women are making and families are making in other portions of the country that don't have the material wealth that we enjoy. The second successful strategy for lowering birth rates is going to be distribution of contraceptives. And I just want to highlight 2 things here. One, the results, as we will see in the case of Bangladesh, the results of contraception distribution are immediate. It happens quicker than, say, for example, economic development. That can take, years and years and years to pursue greater levels of economic development. But the results of contraception happen pretty quickly. The second thing is, not only do major branches of both these universalizing and ethnic religions that are listed here, not only do major branches of some of these faiths disagree with contraception, but sometimes denominations within a branch disagree with contraception. So that's something that we need to know, especially when we think about our religion unit and chapter 6. So Bangladesh, what's this all about? Well, here's the basic idea. The use of contraception in Bangladesh dramatically increased from 1975 to now. So essentially, from 1975 to 2011, it goes from 8% to 61%. What are the results of that? Let's look at their total fertility rates. Oh my! Their TFR in 1970 was 6.95. The average woman was having 7 kids. What is it in 2017? 2.06. Wow. Like, that's ZPG. Pretty crazy. As we look at women using contraception, there's different forms of contraception. Again, I'm not trying to go to health class right now. China and India, the way that they implement contraception is certainly different than how it's implemented in, say, for example, Europe or North America. But you do see contraception on the rise, except for really 2 key regions. You could say maybe 3, but 2 for sure. One will be Southwest Asia. This would be Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, Qatar's right there. Okay, now we get to Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, for sure. And even here in Southeast Asia, there are portions that are not. Now, where is Bangladesh that we had talked about? There it is right there. All right, so to review the demographic transition, here's the basic idea. Again, stage 1, high birth, high death, low natural increase rate. By the time that the death rate plummets in stage 2, the birth rate drops the first time in stage 3. You have low birth and low death by stage 4. Stage 1 has low natural increase rate. Stage 4 has low natural increase rate. But the difference is when you move from stage 1 to stage 4, you end up adding a whole lot of people to a society's population. That would be the natural increase rate of stage 2 and 3. Okay? The majority of countries out there are either in stage 2 or stage 3. So you have 2 big breaks with the past. One will be the sudden drop in death rate, that's stage 2. And the other one will be the drop in birth rate, that's stage 3. Stage 2 correlates with North America and Europe's industrial revolution and technological innovation. Stage 2 correlates in Asia, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa with the diffusion of the medical revolution for many of those countries. Now, when we talk about a drop in the birth rate, that's a cultural thing. That's a choice. That's a change in a society. That's an increase in the role of women in a country's economy. Okay, now let's get to Malthus. Here he is. Thomas Robert Malthus sits down in 1798, I think it was, and summarily decides that the world's going to run out of food. And not only that, but he says, not me, obviously, we need to start employing some social engineering methods, maybe even embrace some eugenics, he says, so that the have-nots of a society stop procreating because it's irresponsible. So here's this guy using mathematics and at the time, the best science available, and using the data of that time and accurately predicting if these things don't change, we are going to run out of food. Problem. Things changed. And in the process, the eugenics movement did terrible things. I mean, go look at Buck versus Bell as a Supreme Court decision. Supreme Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, as they allow for forced sterilization on pockets of the American populace. Really gross stuff here, okay? But all under the guise of, heavy air quotes, science. Malthus's views, again, is he says population grows what I would say exponentially. That is, if you have say, for example, back to Bangladesh, and their total fertility rate was 7. You got 2 here, then they have 7. Those 7 have 7. Those 7 have 7. That's like put an exponent on it. Boom, that's exponential growth. Whereas food supply increases incrementally, what he said arithmetically. Okay, fine. So he is predicting the coming apocalypse unless people start having fewer children. Well, they did. And he couldn't have predicted this all over the world, but it happens. Now, there are modern day Malthusians. There are people that predict doom and gloom, nightmarish scenarios. Oh my gosh, this is going to happen if things stay the same. And who knows, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but we call those people neo-Malthusians, that is to say modern-day Malthusians. They say that two characteristics of the recent population growth make it more frightening. One is the fact that there's a bunch of countries now in stage 2, whereas when Malthus was putting it down, only a few countries had entered stage 2, and they were the only ones in the history of the world to enter stage 2. The other thing they say is, okay, fine, we got it wrong on food, but it's not food. In the 80s and 90s, they were saying it's resources. We're going to run out of oil. In the early 2000s, they were talking about, a barrel of oil is $140. This is unsustainable. We're going to run out. And they told us, hey, we're going to be out of oil. Dude, that didn't happen either. And I don't want to get into like oil shale and whatever. The price of oil right now, within the past 6 months, it's been down to as low as $20 a barrel, right? Like, again, they were wrong, but they were right in that time period by saying if things stay the same, this is what it's going to look like, right? Okay, next, let's put his theory to the test. And to go back to what I was saying, like I remember sitting in a high school classroom like, oh my gosh, the world's going to run out of oil in 40 years. And then what are we going to do? World ain't running out of oil. Okay. Human beings have the potential to change course. Human beings have the potential to change their behavior and modify it. Certainly, the 20th century can show us that. Okay. Now, he was wrong. Okay. According to his model, world population was going to quadruple in 50 years. It didn't. But again, he didn't foresee the cultural changes, the economic changes, the technological changes. Looking at India as an example, even in a country like India, 1.5 billion, give or take, you're seeing still food production, be it rice, be it wheat, it's above the population. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about, and this is something I think you might see because of the current climate we are in, and that is the epidemiologic transition. So what is epidemiology? Well, this is the science concerned with the incidence, distribution, and control of disease throughout time and place. Now, the epidemiologic transition is going to emerge with the demographic transition and focus on unique health threats for countries that are in stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. So what do people in those societies face? Also, historically, we'll look back at stage 1 and we'll try to predict out into stage 5. So let's talk about stage 1. Nobody's still in stage 1 anymore, but at that time it was infectious and parasitic diseases. The Black Plague is an example. Again, you had high death rates in stage 1, so there was very little population growth. Stage 2 was the stage of the receding pandemics, a rapidly declining death rate, though. A pandemic we would define as a disease that occurs over a wide geographic area and affects a very high proportion of the population. So you have things that happen in the Industrial Revolution that are going to reduce the spread of disease. First of all, you have capital, you have money, you have wealth being generated. And with that wealth, what we do is we put that to use to make sure that we're living longer through medicine advances, to make sure we're living longer in terms of a more predictable food supply, in terms of better nutrition, in terms of better health. So that's something that would be stage 2. A stage 2 country, you're going to see different diseases that are still there that we oftentimes don't deal with in a stage 4, the demographic transition country, because we're not in stage 4, the epidemiologic transition. Stage 3, now again, the birth rate is beginning to drop, and that typically correlates with economic development. And as you get economic development, you tend to see better health. So now you see an increase in chronic disorders associated with aging, like cardiovascular disease, like cancer. Stage 4, same thing, cardiovascular disease and cancer. Now, the only difference between stage 3 and stage 4 is the death rate is moderately declining in stage 3, and it's low in stage 4, but you can see it increasing because they have a lot of old people there. And again, the typically, high number one killer in North America is heart disease, coronary heart disease. Most people don't know that. We want to focus on all this other stuff, and those things are fine to focus on. But I would look at number one. How many times have you ever seen somebody with a blue check mark raising awareness for heart disease? I never see it. They talk about things that divide us or we allow to divide us, and those issues may very well be important. But who's talking about heart disease? That's the number one killer in North America. Okay, stage 5 of the epidemiologic transition. I think you could see this. And again, technically there's no stage 5 of the demographic transition, but when we're talking about stage 5, we'll be talking about infectious diseases. And there was all sorts of reasons that they gave that they were worried about a reintroduction of perhaps like a pandemic. So when they're talking about infectious diseases, you have these microbes that evolve and establish a resistance to drugs or the treatment. Another reason for a stage 5 could be the increased connections we have in a global world, people transporting back and forth and spreading something. And the other one will be poverty. When these hit poor areas, they could have a devastating effect if they did not have the ability to treat it with medicine because a lack of access. I think COVID-19, I know that it fits stage 5 of the epidemiologic transition. And to be frank with you, I would read stage 5 of the demographic transition and think, oh yeah, that could be. I never thought that I would be sitting here on an online lesson talking to you about stage 5 of the epidemiologic transition because the world has been hit by stage 5 of the epidemiologic transition. But that's what's happening. I'm not trying to be scary at all. I'm simply telling you that COVID-19 would fit under the umbrella of a stage 5 of the epidemiologic transition. I'm also very hopeful and optimistic about the future, so I don't want you to take that the wrong way. But it would fit there. And for that reason, I think I might expect to see something about this. So really make sure to study the epidemiologic transition. We talk about increased connections. Here were the arrivals at U.S. airports of international passengers in 2011. So when you talk about something that could be spread, just look at these hotspots, right? And this would correlate with some of the early hotspots for the coronavirus. When we look at healthcare, yes, of course, health conditions vary around the world. One of the ways that we look to evaluate development is looking at expenditures or the money spent on healthcare. One, total money, and then percentage of a country's GDP. Okay, healthcare expenditures, looking at, again, this per capita, good figure. You see the highest per capita healthcare expenditures in North America, in Western Europe, also high here in South Pacific. And also, you could see, Brazil, Argentina, Chile coming in there. Government expenditures on healthcare. In the United States, you could talk about Medicaid and Medicare. Those are our two programs. Physicians per 10,000 people. We're seeing large numbers of doctors, again, in the MDCs and small per 10,000 people in LDCs. Tell me how many doctors total. Doesn't tell me anything unless I know per person or per 10,000 people. That begins to tell me something, right? So when you look at the United States, people will be like, oh, the United States is number one on the coronavirus. Okay, what are they per million? That's the answer to the question. And it ain't number one. It ain't even close to number one. So again, looking at all these figures together rather than trying to paint a narrative, that is critical thinking. So to give a summary of population, global population is concentrated in a few places that are not too wet, not too high, not too dry, not too cold, not too mountainous. Almost all natural increase rate is in LDCs. You need to know that. MDCs have a stable population, if not even maybe slightly declining, maybe even the death rate exceeds the birth rate. Population varies amongst regions because not all countries are in the same stage of the demographic transition, but nobody's still in stage 1 and nobody's in stage 5 because it doesn't exist. And the epidemiologic transition model is connected to the demographic transition model, and it tries to help explain why different regions face varying health threats. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'll talk to you next time when we're going to look at migration. Have a great day.